Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. As you can appreciate, he's my friend, first of all. No, welcome. This is, as you know, the lower chamber. As you know as well, we have a General Congress that is integrated by two chambers. The Senate, where there are 128, and the Chamber of Representatives that has 500. As you know, 20 years ago, non-party has the majority, at least to pass the, or minimum, nor the elemental reforms. I mean, as you know, it is needed have and one to pass any initiative. Then what I would like to underline is that we have worked a lot. And when I say we, I would like to refer to every party. As you know, I have been the president of the ruling party, but it is not an obstacle to recognize the contribution of all kind of parties. First of all, we have a constitution that indeed now we are celebrating its centennial, precisely. The constitution has 136 articles, and we have reformed 706 times the constitution. I insist on it. 136 articles, and we have had 706 reforms or additions or in general changes. But the most important data is that almost half of the total reforms have been done in the last 20 years. If I told you that we haven't had a majority at least in this chamber 20 years ago and in the Senate 17 years ago, this implies that more than one party has passed these reforms. Then the successful is due to the plurality to more than 2 or 3 or 4 parties. This is a very good news because I think that this is a kind of successful of politics, of doing politics, because it's my conviction that when we put in a kind of first place the general interest of the nation, we can be able to pass these kind of reforms, but much more. Out of these 323 or something like this in the last 20 years, in this time, in the term of President Peña, we have passed 153 out of 706 in 100 years. What I would like to underline is that this is the most reformer regime all over the time. And this has been happened because of not only the capacity of write down certain proposals, but of the attitude, the responsibility of all the parties. Then, again, I insist on it. This is a kind of success due to the plurality that has arrived for, I think, all time. Then, in our country, in our current life, the public life, or during almost all the 20th century, the public scene, the public scenario was practically dominated by one party for ages. But let me only for with the intention to fix one point in this kind of chronology. The history of the pluralism began in 66 with, by the way, with a reform of our constitution to admit some new figure, new type of representation that was called deputies or representatives of party. I mean, they they didn't triumph, they didn't gain, they didn't defeat anyone in an election, but they or their party got certain number of votes that in that time this was the thought they had to be represented in the Congress. Then in the very first, I think I insist on it, 66 or 64, 66 more or less, when the Chamber of Deputies didn't have a certain fixed number. It depended on the number of the citizens. Much more, not the citizens, the number of the inhabitants, the people. What I mean is that at that time began this kind of new position before the plurality that was growing and growing in that time. In 77, we had a new reform, and for the first time we had determined a certain number of the people who came to the Chamber of Deputies, 300. Then 300 so-called of majority that had defeated the rest of the parties in a specific part of the territory of the national territory, and 100. This is very important. A certain figure, 100 of deputies that were called of proportional representation. What I mean is that all of them, 100, didn't gain ground specifically, but the votes, this was the principal idea, the main idea. We decided not to waste that kind of votes. So, in big steps, 1802 was the first time that the PRI lost a district. I mean, 299 districts for the PRI and 1 district for the opposition. Nowadays, maybe I am talking to you of many data or many facts that are not absolutely important, but I think that the year that we can fix a democratic transition, or at least that began, because I am firmly thinking that the democratic transition hasn't concluded. We are exactly in a part of this process. This time, when I think that was a very important fact, was in 88, when, first of all, in that time, Senate had 64 seats, 64 seats, the half of the current seats. Two, two seats for each state, 32, two times 64. This 88 was the first time that the PRI lost the elections in at least two entities, two states. Obviously, it was a very huge majority, but the success or the fact that I would like to reveal, to precise, is that for the first time there were another kind of voices in the Senate, and obviously, when the PRI had lost one seat out of 300. In that time, the opposition in general ran, and I don't remember exactly how many, but maybe they had several 30 or 40 or 50. I don't remember precisely. What I would like to offer to you is this point of view that from that time on, all, all the circumstances in politics has changed. Absolutely. Um, I think firmly that this was the time when many factors, many institutions, many instances of the public power changed. Let me try to explain to you this position. For example, um, some governors that were elected from that time uh, came from other parties. And precisely today, we, the PRI, we have 16 out of 32. And this is the executive branch of the public power. I mean, the president of the republic and the governors. There are several local governments that have changed more than one time. I mean, the PRI was defeated, and the PRI some years later won the elections, and I think that this is an absolutely round data that democracy has, or we have a kind of matured democracy. What about the legislative? Um, nowadays, nowadays we have no majority in the Senate, as I told you, from 2000 to this time, and the chamber from 97 to this time. But we have been able to build agreements, not only elemental agreements, but very important agreements to get some one or some of the most deepest reforms in our history. Let me precise that recently President Peña has promoted from the second day of his term, precisely the December 2nd, that the most important political parties could sign the Pact of Mexico, that meant that we, because that time I was the president of the PRI, we were able to build a kind of pre-agreements. I describe them as a pre-agreements because obviously the real, the formal, the final agreement was built here in the Congress of the Union. And this package of reforms that were at least 13, 14, 9 of them are reforms to the Constitution. These are parts of the number that I told you, that I offered you to you, 153, I think. But these, the comprehension, is a very ample reform or group of reforms, among others, the energetic reform, for example, that I think that this is one of the most transcendental historical reforms because changes a kind of way of viewing the world, the country, the future. The reform in the educational system that changed deeply the way that our professors, our teachers, much more, our teachers had the obligation to teach, to work, to organize, and as it could be a very simple idea, but in the center of the worries of the interest are the students and the union, an ancient and very powerful union of teachers, had a very important influence in the whole system. One of the most important decisions of that time was to finish with this not only influence but in many offices in many states of our country, they were in charge of the education. I mean, they were not only the teachers, they were who were in charge of the administration of the system. Then, among others, we promoted the reform in the field of communications, and we had a political electoral reform as well. We pushed a reform in our legal system. We have a kind of habeas corpus. We call it amparo. This is a very important part of our legal system that protects to the citizens. Before the authorities, all kind of authorities, then we obtained, we constructed, we built a very important and deep reform to our system of amparo. What else? We have a reform of the labor world, for example, at the same time. Then, in other fields, we reformed in a very important way to the judicial branch of the public power. Precisely in 94, I remember perfectly the date, in December 31st, the last day of the year, the President Cedillo, that in that time, it's a kind of paradox because he studied economy, but he promoted the most important reform to our judicial system, to the organization of the judicial branch of the public power. I think that maybe the most relevant data is that the judicial power is absolutely autonomous. They manage and has its own disciplinary system, the system of promotion, or at the same time a kind of disciplinary, I told you, disciplinary system. And all kind of aspects related at the everyday life in this very important part of our system of check and balances that it's absolutely we needed absolutely if we would like to say that we are a democratic state. Two more aspects. These I affirm that we are living some years ago, from some years, we have living a kind of pacific and democratic transition that we haven't concluded. Much more, I am not sure that when or which could be the circumstances to affirm that the democratic transitions has concluded. I don't know. But what I am absolutely sure is that we are living, we are, or so many people think that they are suffering. I'm not. I'm sure that we are living a kind of pacific, democratic, and productive transition. Some highlights. The democracy and the respect of human rights, for example, arrived to live among us for all our life. Then it is much it's better than we not only admit, but we could share our everyday life with these kind of universal values. They aren't going to go back ever. Then it is much better to be to consider that they are where we can share these thoughts, these principles, and we can live absolutely in absolutely in absolute comfort among them. And on other highlight is that this is a factor that I am used to calling a kind of distribution of the power. But then we have lived, we have experienced this distribution of power horizontally, horizontally, and there has been a kind of distribution of the power vertically as well. I mean, the states and much more the municipalities were for ages a kind of testimonial government because not only the power but the money were in charge of or were the federation, the federal government in charge of this. I insist on it. Not only the functions, the power, but the money. But now we have experienced a kind of sharing of power, vertically speaking. I mean, the states have gained faculties and responsibilities, and obviously the municipalities. This is a kind of new, or at least a new version of an ancient decision, public decision, that this is the federalism. Then what I mean is that it's a kind of a renewed federalism and municipalism, and a kind of balance in the development of the power in the federal level, because we that have adopted from the very beginning a presidential system, we have now not the powerful president as we had not very far, 5 years ago. Many of the reforms that I talked related I talked to you were, let's say, against the original powers, the original functions of the president. I sincerely, I like this kind of redistribution of the power, not only horizontally, but vertically as well. Because if we were able to consolidate these kind of reforms, I'm sure that we could give to the nation certain bases, certain very firm, mm, a kind of cornerstones. Let me try to take advantage of this figurative sense. It's a kind of cornerstone of a democratic, of a social rule of law. This is my conviction. And finally, I ask for your comprehension. I don't know if the best word, because my English is poor, but I have done my best. Thank you.
I'm sure some of you have questions, so Dr. Cesar has a little bit time for some few questions.
One by one, please.
Whoa, okay. Can you talk us through kind of what it was like when you were going through the structural reforms? I know there were several. Can you just kind of talk us through the policy making process, or how the parties came to kind of come together to work on the reforms?
I like to insist on this. The Pact of Mexico was a very important political agreement because it was considered a kind of successful of politics. To be sincere, I think that the opposition parties uh, gave us a very important um, doses of trust, and they had to be reflected in the reforms. I think that this was the factor that gave us a kind of space of negotiation that led us to feel comfortable. For example, in the energetic reform, the left wing of the legislators in general, all of the left wing parties, they didn't accompany us in the energetic reform. But we were able to respect their own position. But on the contrary, in the fiscal and all the reform related to financial aspects, for example, the right wing in politics, they were against us. This reform was built with the leftist, and we assume with the PRI that we are located in the center or in the center left of the very ample political positions. And nowadays, the development of the reforms is not the same. What I mean is that many of them, for example, the educational reform, depends on the teachers and the every year, uh, I don't know the word. Every year we have a new year in educationally speaking. No? Then it depends on the professors, on the teachers, sorry, that they are going to school again, They are preparing by themselves, or there is a very complex system offering to better their skills, and the state, the Mexican state, recognizes this effort. But for example, what I mean is that I think that the energetic reforms will need several years, maybe decades, to become a very firm and very hard and very consolidated reform. But on the contrary, for example, the financial one, all related to investment and budget, etc., each year changes. Then nowadays, the previous months, we discussed many aspects of these reforms. What I mean is that this kind of reform can be newly changed, or we can discuss again in some years. But not, it is not, at least from my point of view, this is not the case of the energetic reform. In sum, what I am sure is that we have to persevere. We have to be very first of all, we have to be absolutely sure that we have made the best decisions, the right decisions, not looking only the changes in the short term. We need to not to lose, or no, we have to be absolutely convinced that the most important results won't be in the short term. But I am convinced that one of kind of public or collective decision must be to be absolutely firm, and to be convinced that we are on the right path, in the right way.
Thank you. Any more questions? One last? Okay. Two questions. First, do you have a microphone?
guest.
Oh, our
Yes.
guest, and then Edgar.
No, no, please. Sí, él juega de local.
Thank you very much for truly interesting remarks. I have a very short question on, so among the structural reform you led, for example, like tax reform, which requires the policy to change the distribution scheme and gives additional pressure to some certain sectors in social sectors. Is the competition change in chamber, like in majority? Does it gives you a driving force to give stability to the policy, or is it become more sustainable to push on such kind of distribution schemes to change throughout the country, or it's still like difficult to like coordinate between it? I would like to ask some, like, is there any change in political situation which gives some change in policy consistency?
As you know, from Saint Matthew, the disciple of Jesus, that was, by the way, was a person in charge of the taxes. In all times, the taxes are a problem, no? This is in español, in Spanish, they are called impuesto. And the word imponer implies that anyone, no one asks for if you agree. Obviously, none is can admit, at least at the first glance. Then it's very difficult to change the structure of taxes, and at the same time we have had to change the structure of the budget, because some figures, for ages we depended on the oil, then many of, or a very good part, a very important percentage of our incomes depended on the oil. Nowadays, more or less 40%. Nowadays, the public economy or the budget depends on the oil only in 18%. Another figure, we have, because many people complains that every time the taxes um, presses press the same people. President Peña has decided not to create new taxes, nor to add percentages or the amount that we have to pay. Then the structure, the public structure, has worked a lot to to take to the formality, to the legal system, the people who produce or offer some service. What I mean is that the responsibility of paying taxes has been distributed with much more equality. And at the same time, related to the budget, for example, there are some new actions in social policy that, in one hand, is committed to the environment, for example, and to the incorporation of many people, emphatically speaking, the poorest, that are not only they are not only the destiny of this kind of public policies, but they have adopted a new role. What I mean is that some programs of these with this of this style, of this characteristic, consider that the people must be involved in their own development. Because for ages, people, the government, the Mexican state, only gave things, objects. I forgot the word. Goods, in a sense. Now the people are involved in their own change, not only of attitudes or behavior, but they are involved in a kind of new way to solve their own problems. Then I think that we have gained ground in this field of of the social policy. The last one, please.
So, given that we have an election next year, a very important election, I think, which will define, in some sense, the path and the nation project that we will be following for the next 6 years. Uh, there are some voices that say that one of those paths will take us back and like reverse all of these very important and transcendental changes. How prepared is the as a whole to keep the institutional track and the this growth, economic growth and welfare track that we're experiencing, or starting to experience now in the basis? Is it prepared for a politician that could make decisions upon the gut feeling or other interests? That would be my.
I think that one of our main challenges is to communicate in the right way. because these must be considered not the reforms of the Mexican state. There they are. This is my personal my personal point of view. They are the main reforms of the last decades, and are a kind of product of the consensus of the a right interpretation of what people needs, feels, and wants. Then it is not enough to know this is a legal data, a legal figure. This is not enough that our opponents, or they, the different parties, they must be sure that the constitutional reforms demand two-thirds of the members of each chamber. Then it's very difficult that one party, or a kind of alliance of parties, could be able to change the constitution without his political opponents. Then, if but this is this the my expression is absolutely formal. My absolute position, my right and firm position, is that we need to explain enough which is the risk if we move abruptly in that direction. Because we have invested decades, many years, in building these new positions before the world. And it is not an exaggeration if I affirm that it's before the world. It is. But some of the most important investments, for example, in the energetic field, are entrepreneurs that are not absolutely Mexicans. At least they have offered, or they have put in the table very important amounts of money. Our challenge, I mean, the PRI members, of the people who are in the side of the government, we have this challenge of be efficient in our exercise of communication. I insist on it, not only to underline the benefits or the opportunities that we as Mexicans could have now and from now on, but which could be the risks in a world that is opened and it is absolutely interrelated. But to finish with this, I think that the most important of the messages is not uh, um, is not um, an exercise of talking. It is not a speech. The most important of the messages are the results. And I am absolutely convinced, I am sure that we have gained ground in this field. We have been able to demonstrate the precise, the effective, the touching results that we have obtained. This is very important. We have obtained with the participation of all the political forces. This is, I think, our immediate challenge. As you can have been able to appreciate, we are right now in the middle of the hurricane. Now we every day, by the way, the pre-campaigns begin December the 14th, but the real campaigns have started months ago. The pre-campaign, then it's very difficult not to be involved in this kind of earthquake that we all are suffering. And as you can imagine, because this is a very current situation all over the world, we need to fix where are the highlights of the challenges, of the possibilities of the future that we have to, to front with responsibility. It's very easy and it's very common to fall in this kind of demagogies. It's very easy. Then I insist on it. One of our most important challenges is to communicate in the right way and to respect the elector, to respect the citizenship, to respect each person that, as you can, as you know, they they have, let's say, a kind of bona fide position, but they are not willing to be involved in a kind of risk, in a kind of danger, in a kind of problem. I would like to finish with this. This is my conviction. This is my absolutely and firm position. We all, the members of all the parties, we have to work thinking and acting ever knowing that what it is in the middle is Mexico, not the partial interest or the next election. We need to be convinced that our children uh, are expecting a better world. Thank you. Thank you all.